Here at Buffalo Trace Distillery for another episode of Whiskey Wednesday. We have Master Distiller Harlen Wheatley. How you doing, Harlen?
I'm doing great.
Looks like we have the distiller in the background. It's obviously one of our favorite views. It's really, really cool to see it from this angle.
Yeah, we're lucky enough. About 6 years ago, we had a farm directly behind the distillery, and we were planning ahead, of course, for expansion, and we were able to purchase the farm, and the farm basically reconnected a lot of the original property of the distillery, because we've got a lot of pictures of the view from up here, you know, from the 1800s when people were, you know, still utilizing this as part of the farm of the original distillery. So we were able to purchase the farm, and you know, for us, it's a really important part of it because we had to expand our warehousing, and we started expanding that about 3.5 years ago. And now this farm that we have is almost completely full of barrel warehouses and full of barrels aging. So it's really important, and you know, gives us a bird's eye view of the distillery and you know how it's grown over the years, and we continue to appreciate it. But today, you know, on this farm, one of the things we do is we grow experimental corn, and you know, growing corn is just one aspect of our experimental collection, but the grains themselves really play an important part of the process and of the distilling flavors that we get. And we're going to talk a little bit about one really important ingredient for us, which is red winter wheat. And when we produce our different bourbons, we, of course, through the experimental collection, we try a lot of different grains, but our traditional grains for bourbon, of course, is yellow dent corn. We use the highest grade we can get, which is a number 2 variety. We do a plump rye, but this is a malted barley that we use for the enzymes and some flavor. Those two are the main components of all of our bourbons. And then we use a plump rye to give it spice and flavor, and that's the majority of our bourbons. But then there's one other ingredient that you take this rye out of the process and you add the red winter wheat. And the red winter wheat, what it does is it adds a sweetness to the distillate, similar to what we always say is wheat bread and rye bread. It's kind of the same thing. You have a wheated bread, you know, it's sweeter, more mellow, and it's exactly like what you would expect it would deliver while you're distilling. So we have a lot of different products that we use the red winter wheat. We learned a lot, so we started using that in 1991. That was kind of our first distillate with red winter wheat, and then you know, we've grown over the years to a lot of different products. We've used it in our experiments and our main products, and we're going to talk a little bit about these 5 products today. They're some of our, you know, mainstream products, and we use red winter wheat in all these, and basically because we're really happy with the way red winter wheat does in our distillates and our recipes. And something else we've learned over the years is how it ages a little bit differently in the warehouse, and we do that through changing environments and recipes and barrel locations and all that. But the recipe is a really important part of it, so we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through these.
Sure. No, that's great. And I think, you know, something I'm interested in and others is just, you know, when you're handling different grains, is there a big difference in, you know, before we get started in flavor and brands, is there a big difference on how you handle them, rye versus wheat?
Well, in our distillery, we've only got one process, so we call it plug flow, where you can only run really one thing at a time. So we use a lot of the same equipment that we use on a rye. We do in our hammer mills when we grind the grain. It gives us a little bit different profile, and that's on purpose. We want that different profile when we're cooking the grains. And then when we distill it, we do a little different process in the reflux. And then we do a little bit different process when we enter the distillate in the barrels. So we have some differences, not just recipe, but when you factor all those together, that's what gives us the one thing that we have in common across all of our products is we try to have a wide variety of products. In order to do that, you have to vary those things up. So.
Gotcha. Is there a when you get these grains in from the farm and the vendor, is there something you're really looking for in this form? When you're talking about red winter wheat, is there something that's like a red flag or something that you can tell is like, this is a really great batch?
Yeah, well, the one thing, we do quality checks on every truckload that comes in. We want the moisture levels to be just right. We check for, of course, we check for foreign material and anything inside the grain and weight to make sure the weight's there. And all those have to be within spec or we just don't accept it. We don't have any degrees of freedom. So it's really important for that quality to be there. Of course, we contract this stuff way in advance, sometimes 5-year contracts for some of the farmers that are growing it. But that's a really important part of the process is the inspections of the grain.
Are you getting grain shipments throughout the year, or is it a seasonal thing, or
because we have such a big variety, we make rye bourbon maybe 3 weeks, and then we'll run wheated bourbon 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll switch back and forth throughout the year. So yes, we're getting truckloads, throughout the year.
I know we have a lot of fans of the wheated bourbons here. It's the same with the ryes, but I thought most people would want to know that that's an ongoing thing. That happens all year round.
And we're making more.
And
we're always making more.
That's right. Especially up here on, we can see the distillery in the background, but behind us is a lot of the new warehouses and things that it's a previous episode. If you haven't seen the episode on the expansion for aging, check that out too. We can show off all the warehouses there. What do we have? So we have some Weller, 4-grain, Taylor, and a couple others here.
Yeah, basically through the years, again, we've started a long time ago making our wheated products, but we learned a lot through our processes, and I'll talk about each one of these. But one of the things we learned is we like the way that mellow flavor comes through on the red winter wheat. And so one of the ingredients in our Wheatley vodka is the red winter wheat, and we're able to add a little bit extra flavor, delicate finish. It just makes a really good clean vodka, and that's one of our best flavors, cleanest vodka we make. And the red winter wheat really delivers in there.
And as far as just like for somebody tuning in that doesn't have an extreme palate or new, let's talk about the differences in that palate when you taste something that's high rye or rye versus the wheat.
Yeah, most of the time when people are tasting, say, a high rye bourbon or a rye whiskey, they're tasting, spice. Some people say fruitiness, sassafras, all these different added spices to the bourbon. It just adds a lot of character to the bourbon. The wheat does too. It's just a different type of character. It's a mellow, mild, sweet, nice, smooth character, some people say. So and it's a strong character. So it holds throughout its aging life. So as you age a wheated bourbon, you can age it a little bit longer and it doesn't give way to the barrel, kind of like a rye bourbon or a rye whiskey does. So, wheat is strong in its own character, and it's a good one for us. Then, so we do the vodka, of course, and we do that in tandem with our bourbons. We can make those side by side in different stills. But for the wheated bourbon, we start off life with our Weller label. That's the youngest wheated recipe we have. It starts off at, even though we say youngest, it's 7 years old for us, which that's older than a lot of our competition. But the idea is we start off life at 7, and then we've expanded the Weller label a little bit too. So we've got the Weller 7, the 90 proof. Then we've got the Weller Antique Collection. We've got the Weller 12. We've got the Weller Full Proof. We've got the Craft Your Perfect Bourbon. So we've expanded that label, and we're going to continue to expand that label as much as we can. But the 12-year-old is one of the good ones for the Weller, and it uses the red winter wheat again, corn, malted barley, and red winter wheat.
And you said the wheat really does well the longer you age it. It really holds up in a barrel longer, and that might be some of the reason we see some of our older products, not all of them. We've got some old rye bourbons too, but some of the older wheated bourbons, that must be why, correct?
Definitely. So, we just know through experience that, as we age these barrels, we have to put them in, anticipated usage locations. So we know that if we're going to have a 20-year-old barrel, we're not going to put it in the top floor of a warehouse. But we also, through our entry proof and recipe, we're able to make sure that bourbon ages without getting too strong in the barrel, and really does well with it as we go. And we're going to have a little surprise here at the end.
Yeah, that's nice.
You can see.
And you're talking, you touched on entry proof, and we talked about it a little bit last week. But is the entry proof for a wheated bourbon about the same or the same for the rye as well, or do you treat that differently too?
We do treat our entry proof a little bit differently, only because that's the original recipe. We know that at that lower proof that we put it away, we know that it's still got enough proof that it delivers the flavor. But yet you're balancing that because you're going to age it longer. So if you put it away a little bit too high, what could happen is as it ages and it's 23 years old, it might pick up too much of that barrel. So we do balance that and put it in at a little bit lower proof than we do our rye.
Great. And so we've talked about the Wheatley vodka. It's a clean, crisp vodka, great on the palate too because of the wheat. The Weller 12's got some age on it, and now the full proof is that. I'm assuming you're going back to the foolproof now. Yeah,
and what we wanted to do with the foolproof is we wanted to show people kind of what it is like in the barrel. So it's basically what we put it away at, and we're able to maximize the strength coming out, give it a lot of flavor, really full, not just foolproof, but full of flavor. And we get a lot of feedback that's what they're seeing. So we're happy with that one, and it's doing well. And, all of these are allocated, of course, but it's a good offering of that recipe.
Yeah, that's great. It's honestly my favorite of the Wellers for sure is the full proof. And is the full proof, if you could explain the difference between a full proof and say the single barrel.
Yeah, when we say
barrel proof.
Yeah,
we don't have a barrel proof. So what's the full proof?
When we say full proof, we just mean that's the full amount of proof that we put it away in the barrel. So we put these away at 114 proof, so we wanted to bring it back to the full proof of the entry proof, and that's what we mean by full proof. And it's a little bit higher, but it's balanced. But even though it's higher proof, it's balanced with that mellow character of the wheat, and so it's really good offering. It's it's kind of in between of the 90 proof, the 107, and the 114 proof. It kind of gives you the the ability to pick which one you like the best.
Yeah, you got the full spread of flavor there in the Weller line.
And I mentioned earlier the experimental collection and trying all these different grains. And about 15 years ago, we said, we really like what the wheat does for us. We really like the barley and the corn, of course, and we really like the rye. There's no reason to take these out. So we decided to just use all four of these. And we tried to pick a lot of the things we liked of each one and put them together into one recipe, kind of the best of both worlds. And we put that away, we let it age, and as it was aging, we would taste it, every 12 months. And we were really happy with the way this thing was progressing. And we knew that we kind of had one that's going to be, really good when it was fully aged. So about 5 years into the process, we started making more of that every year. But we started offering this now, it's been about 4 or 5 years, through the E.H. Taylor label, and one year it won the world's best whiskey. So that was confirmation to us that good thing we continue to make some of that, and really it's really why we do the experimental process anyway. And we got the feedback, so now we're going to have a full-time offering of 4 grain, and we're still using the red winter wheat, but we're also adding that rye to give it that well-rounded complexity and what people would expect.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking at we have an E.H. Taylor channel as well, just so everybody knows. If you're tuning in on another channel, we also have brand channels like Weller, E.H. Taylor, and the Distillery and Buffalo Trace. But on E.H. Taylor Facebook, we've got people chiming in from Benton, Kentucky, Boise, Idaho, Louisiana, and somebody chimes in. Let's see, it is Jim on E.H. Taylor's E.H. Taylor Facebook. Just said, just had a pour of Weller 12 for my birthday last night, and it was just as good as when I first cracked the bottle. So we know we got a lot of fans of the Weller 12.
That's good. I'm glad we had some people from Idaho. They raise a lot of corn out here.
They do, yeah. Boise, Idaho. Kelly from Boise, Idaho is chiming in here.
Yeah. So, that's with our experimental collection. That's kind of what happens with when we basically graduate experiments into full-time products, and we're really happy with it. We're going to have more of that to come. And then probably our most talked about recipe that we use is the Pappy recipes that we utilize the red winter wheat. And so we've got a lot of offerings for the same type of idea, and we have varieties to offer people through the Pappy line, but this is kind of the 23-year-old is probably the most allocated that we have of the product. And a lot of people talk about it. Hard to get, of course. We do very few bottles of it, but again, growing every year. We're making more as we grow. And
that one's open.
That one is open, and after 23 years, you get really dark colors, but again, well balanced because of the recipe, where it's aged, and all those things. So it's it's the halo effect of our bourbons.
Sure, and I think a lot of talk on the Van Winkle 23s and 15s and 20s and everything, and for me, Harlan, the mouthfeel of the Pappy 23 is unlike anything else. A lot of folks think there's it's aged for a long time, a lot of oak flavor in there, of course, but I think that mouthfeel is so unique.
Yeah,
that's a big separator.
And I do think it's balanced, so it's not over the top barrels, and
sure,
that's what it's all about for us, is to be able to balance that aging process and kind of have the peak of performance when you put that bourbon into the bottle, and that's what we try to do with all these bourbons.
Yeah, and I was right before we did a episode with Drew, we did in the lab of blending, and Julian was in there tasting all the barrels and doing all that. So I know he's also a big part of picking barrels and making sure it's good. But it's great. It's a good surprise. All right, so we have Wichita Falls, Indianapolis, Illinois. But a lot of folks love the 4-grain. Dan Gold says, more 4-grain, please. It's amazing. So
we're making more.
We're making more.
This year we're spending about $200 million on our expansion. We're in the middle of expanding the dry house, the still house, the cookers we did last year, our fermenter operation. Everywhere you look, we're building more warehouses, putting more barrels away, and we continue to expand while preserving the quality of our product. That's a really important part of our expansion, is not to do anything to change our legacy brands, and we have no plans of changing that.
Yeah, I think that's neat. So it's like when you go down there and you see the still house, it's right next to the still house you already have. It's right next to the still. So yeah, it's like fermentation tanks are all in the same locations, things like that. So.
Yep.
Looking over some questions here. We've just got some comments. Very informative, Michael Shaw. Thank you, Michael. He watches Whiskey Wednesdays on his lunch breaks, it looks like. So that's great. When it comes to the 4-grain, I'll go back to that really quick. Is there other experiments that use wheat that you've found that wheat maybe it's not a player, it doesn't work well with other grains, or is it just like a really good grain with rye and corn and barley?
We've got thousands of barrels of experiments in our warehouses, and we've got a lot of different varieties of recipes where we use things like red winter wheat. We've used other types of wheat as well. So we just know it's a good grain for distilling and aging. We know that it provides starch and flavor to the product. So it's a good all-around grain that we really haven't had any negative success with the red winter wheat. Mm-hmm. But we've always got more experiments to run, different recipes, different ways of producing, utilizing the red winter wheat. So, we're excited about that for years to come. Really.
Yeah, and the variety of products in that wheat bourbon category, I think, is just evidence that it works really well. We got older whiskeys, foolproof whiskeys, vodkas, 4-grains. So the variety of wheated bourbons goes beyond just, a Pappy 23 or a Weller 12. There's lots of uses there.
Yep.
We're coming up on our time. I know you're busy. So any closing remarks, any closing statements you'd like to toss in there?
No, I'm glad we talked about this. This is, again, You know, you've got a lot of variables when it comes to making good bourbons. You know, and one of the main variables is the recipe and the grains. And so, you know, we just wanted to show you a little bit of insight on the grains we've selected for most of our bourbons and a lot of our bourbons. And, you know, we'll continue to educate you on what we're up to.
Yeah, lots of things going on. And like we always say, making more, lots of warehouses behind us. We'll show you that another day, but a lot of expansion and hopefully bringing more whiskey to everyone. And obviously we're releasing more and more every single year. So all these we can look forward to. And I'm definitely looking forward to it as a fan as well. So appreciate your time, Harlan. And we'll go ahead and leave it at that.
Okay.
All right, appreciate you.